You are listening to Fantha Tracks.
You're listening to Fantha Tracks. Flip through the galaxy of literature. Welcome to Canon Fodder.
Michael, welcome to Canon Fodder. Very much looking forward to talking about Ghost Agents. Can you give us a little bit of a background? What drew you to taking on this particular title?
That's a great question. So actually I guess you could say, the originator of it. So backtracking a bit, I wrote, in my time writing Star Wars, I've written a lot in the Clone Wars era. You know, the prequel era is my personal favorite. And I actually wrote a series called Battle Tales, Clone Wars Battle Tales. Now, this was back when Star Wars Adventures, the Star Wars, what they called, the all ages line, was still at IDW. I'm sure you're familiar with that, before I made the jump to where it is now with Dark Horse. So the plan at that time was to continue the Battle Tales series that I had started at IDW. One thing led to another, and it wasn't quite a fit for Dark Horse, but we started talking about other ideas, and my original plan was to incorporate the Bad Batch into Battle Tales. So more or less what we did was lost the Battle Tales idea, stuck with the Bad Batch, and we were off and running from there. So I pitched them some ideas. What the Ghost Agent is what stuck. I'm sure we'll talk about Bad Batch in general, but what's so good and what's so beneficial about writing the Bad Batch that makes them really perfect from my perspective is when you're writing for Star Wars, you're always trying to thread a needle. And let me tell you, the more and more, books and comics and shows and, everything that's being created, the needle's getting a lot tighter. So one day the thread's not going to go through. But for right now, you're always trying to find avenues to explore that haven't been thoroughly explored already. And the great thing about the Bad Batch, in addition to how much I love them, was that we are first introduced to them in the Clone Wars series at the very end of the war. So there is a lot of stuff. And then, of course, the Bad Batch series takes place between episodes 3 and 4 area. So you have this whole area of their lore and their missions and their history and character development, all this stuff that was never touched on. So it's somewhere that I really wanted to go, and it's just somewhere that was advantageous to go because there's a lot of fertile ground there.
We know the characters. We, as the viewing public, know the characters pretty much, as you say, from the Bad Batch and Season 7 Clone Wars. For you as a writer, then, doing what you've just described, you're stepping those characters back a lot of, from a writer's point of view, back through a lot of character development that we sort of see in those episodes. So how did you kind of decide where you took those guys to? Or because they're clones, is it the point of view that there's only a limited amount of growth that they can have? Or where do you sort of sit with that? How far back do you take them, if that makes any sense?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, there was always, I never had the sense of like doing an origin story or anything like that, because that gets really hairy, especially when you do a Lucasfilm. Like they're very touchy about canonizing things that might be, somebody wants to explore later. For what I'm doing in the comics, they're like, well, maybe we do a Bad Batch series, a cartoon series that is like, goes to their origins and goes to that stuff. So I know not to touch that. But, how far back do I go? I try not to think about it in terms of like, if you ask me where Ghost Agents took place, I don't really know. I know because we're using early gen, like, actually, no, I'm sorry. I'm confusing that with my Grievous. I'm working at the same time. I got General Grievous graphic novel that's coming out,
right.
of course, and we're going through all the clone designs, and it's early gen clone armor, and that's what I was thinking for a second. But I was like, but that doesn't apply to Bad Batch. So I think it's in my mind, I'm like, I don't concern myself too much with like where it takes place canonically or anything like that. I do think of them as like this is still early team, Bad Batch.
Yeah.
So I want to like I don't want to take for granted who they are and what they do and what their roles are and how they're even defining their roles with each other as a unit. And that was important to me because like it gives definition to who they are. And for anybody who maybe hasn't seen the show or who is just unfamiliar with them in general, it gives them a sense of like, yeah, the tech does this and Crosshair does that and
Yeah.
Wrecker, etc. Um, but place them in a specific period, like it becomes, for me, it's like when you're threading that needle, like I said, the more specific you get, sometimes the harder it becomes, because if you
Yeah.
place it somewhere specific, now you have to deal with like what exactly is going on. But the more you can remove it, you pull that lens out and say, listen, this is a adventure that they had at some point, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
With you have like I think people have seen, Saj shows up at some point, that I haven't spoiled anything, Embo. So you're in the cocktail of Clone Wars villains and things like that. And I feel like that's good enough. I feel like it's nice to just say like, hey, because people have asked me, and I love the question, like when does this take place? It's like before season 7, after season 1. You know?
I love that answer. That's a great answer. I mean, I think writing for Dark Horse, being a Dark Horse title, Star Wars fans of older Star Wars fans will remember very well that great run from sort of Dark Empire right through to the Star Wars adaptation in what was that 2014, 2015. So it's a great chunk of time that Dark Horse had it, and during that time, obviously the prequel trilogy comes along, and a huge amount of now Legends lore was told through Dark Horse. So to your point about threading the needle is so pertinent when you're talking about a Dark Horse title. But you, of course, are doing a comic that is much more broadly aimed at a wider audience. Do you like the fact that you're pitching at not that comics are ever specifically for adults in most cases, but that you're aiming at that sort of mid reader area as Dark Horse seems to be the scope for them. Although to me, completely, it just reads like just a Star Wars comic. It doesn't read like any age pitch. It just reads like a Star Wars comic. Do you prefer that, or do you prefer to, as you've described, thread the needle and find a specific point?
I prefer that. I'll be honest. Like, I think, what I find uh challenging, I guess. I read the Marvel stuff. I don't read all of it, but I read enough. And the challenging thing, even as a reader, like there's no distinction, I don't think. In what I think what you're saying, I think what we both agree in, like there's really no distinction that widely between what Marvel is doing and Dark Horse is doing. Maybe in art. The art in Dark Horse is definitely aimed towards a younger audience. But I don't think the story from what anybody's doing, not just myself, is that different than what Marvel does. But the key distinction is that Marvel is so, and this isn't a criticism at all. It'll sound like it, but it's not. Marvel, though, is so steeped in lore and
Yeah,
continuity, and this series take place between this, and they're closing these gaps, and they're dealing with things that are left unresolved, or creating new pockets of narrative, or whatever the case may be. And there's a hyper focus on that doesn't exist in Dark Horse. Like,
yeah,
oh, and I know other Dark Horse writers, like, we're not taking canon or lore for granted, but like, we're just not really focused on that. And what that does to me is it lowers the entry point for a reader. Like, you pick up a Marvel Star Wars comic right now and you're lost. You have no idea what's going on.
yeah,
Like the specificity is so exact that like you have to know a lot of like just in general of Star Wars and what became before in the Marvel series and what became before that and then the spin-off and the blah 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 blah. Like whereas like Dark Horse, the advantage is that like you can jump in and you can jump out. You can just go read this Bad Batch series and that's it. Like you can read it, you can pick it up. There's nothing you need to know before.
yeah,
There's nothing you need to know adjacent, and you can just have that. And I think that's the kind of thing. And I think you and I like would both we both remember and we both know. I mean, the great things. I mean, I grew up on that Dark Horse Star Wars stuff,
yeah.
and it created so much wild stuff. That's just nuts. But like you just pick up these series. They jumped around in time. They went to the past. They went to the future. They went all over the place.
Yeah.
And you can just pick up a series and read it. And it was great. And I love that. And it's unfortunate that's kind of gotten lost in like the transition at Disney that like there's this hyper focus on like you know canon and then the other stuff is Legends, and it's like, yeah, but like the canon, I don't know, when you do that, you lose a little bit of fun and you lose a little bit of like recklessness and creativity that like I wish that I really loved from that early, well, the initial Dark Horse acquisition of the Star Wars comics.
Yeah, I love that word recklessness because I think back to the original Marvel run back, sort of 77 to 86, and that had that kind of loose, free, undefined to a certain degree. You kind of knew it was after Jedi, it was between Empire and Jedi or wherever it was, but it was loose enough that you could imagine other adventures happening between issues of the comic, let alone panels of the comic, where sometimes it gets so congested you imagine that somebody says, I'm hopping out to buy a drink from a local bar, and then a crazy adventure on the other side of the galaxy takes place, and then they just have to come back to the same spot. One thing I loved about it was the relationship between the characters and Mace Windu, because clearly Mace at this point already puts great stock in their abilities. Was that interesting for you to be able to tell that element of the story as well? Because bringing Mace in is always a joy, because we straight away imagine Samuel L. Jackson, and that's always a treat. But having him interact with the characters gives it, not validity, that's not the right word, but it definitely sort of elevates the stakes by having him there.
Yeah, I really wanted somebody, like in my mind, like the way the Bad Batch functions in my mind, and who knows if this is right or, wrong, I don't know. But like the way they function in my mind is they are like the covert ops team, right? That like the regular clones can't get it done, the Jedi can't get it done because it's, requires a different set of skills, or requires getting hands dirty where the Jedi won't do that, or it doesn't require an entire army. Whatever the case may be, you need this like covert ops team. And every covert ops team needs a great, handler,
Yeah.
basically. you know?
Yeah.
So I was like, well, who would it be? And it's like, it just seemed like Mace was the natural choice. Like, it's like, this isn't really a Yoda thing, like it's not, if Qui-Gon around, maybe him, but like, it's definitely not an Obi-Wan thing. So like, who is really the guy that has that gravity to him that Mace does, that like, he seems like if there's a covert Jedi handler, Mace is the guy,
I'd never thought of it in that way. It is a bit like Charlie with Charlie's Angels, or M with Bond, or somebody to be the guy that focuses them before they go off on a particular mission. Because as you say, they do feel like, I mean, there's definitely the DNA of the A team is in the Bad Batch without doubt.
Oh, 100%. Oh, yes. Yes. I should have put a line of, what is it? I love it when the plan. Oh my God, I'm drawing a total blank. So wherever things go to plan, or
Yeah,
wherever
I love it when a plan comes together. Yeah.
the plan comes together. Jeez Louise. I can't believe I botched that. But yeah, that kind of stuff. And then, yeah, it has that kind of like A-teamness, like almost like Shane Black, almost, like that you can kind of get into as well, like that, a little bit more of an attitude, a little bit more of humor,
Yeah.
and that's the kind of stuff that I love. So yeah, it appeals to me in general, the Bad Batch. I love the characters, and giving somebody that balances, like you said, focuses them, their M. It's gotta be Windu. It's gotta be Mace. He's the guy for that.
For everything in one location, daily news, reviews, interviews, podcasts, video, and social media feeds, bookmark fanthatracks.com for Star Wars news 24/7, 365.
With the TV show, with the cartoon series that criminally only lasted 3 seasons, it should still be going. It was too good to finish. One thing that I loved was obviously the relationship between the team, between Clone Force 99, and then of course Omega comes in, which is past or beyond where you are at the moment, of course. But nevertheless, them being a family, them being a proper band of brothers, but also out in the galaxy in that post Order 66 era. Now you're telling a story that's set well before that, where they're still constrained to a certain point of view, but nevertheless, it's those guys. They're the unit. They're the team. How enjoyable was it then to start to work in? We know the sort of relationships, the almost all brotherly bickering between Crosshair and Hunter, and those sort of elements, and Wrecker trying to kind of calm it down, but being so boisterous. How much fun was it detailing that in the comic?
It's so much fun. I mean, it's such a pleasure, one that I'm very grateful for to be able to write those voices because it's so funny because technically it's audibly one voice who's doing
Yeah.
all the clones, but like they all have these distinct personalities, and like you said, they're soldiers together, they're brothers, so they clash, and they have their ways of handling problems and conflicts that you see in like issue one, where they go to the cantina bar, and Hunter wants to negotiate his way through, and Crosshair just wants to, fire off a bolt and threaten to kill people,
Yeah.
and and it's fun to see how one approach works sometimes and another approach works another time, and that's something that I want to take further, knock on wood, if we're able to do more of this Bad Batch series, which I'd like to do like more of a more minis, like I had planned with Battle Tales. Like
Yeah.
I do have ideas in mind that kind of explore how the Bad Batch see themselves as not just as a unit, but how they see themselves in opposition to other people like them. How, you often define yourself against what you're not. And I want to see the Bad Batch have a chance to also during the wartime see other avenues of clone life that is not theirs and they have to kind of deal with.
I love that point of view. Yeah, that's a great point because they only see what they're allowed to see to a certain degree, and they're always on mission. Obviously, the development beyond that comes after, after Order 66, as we say. That's when they really get the chance to blossom. The era that you're in, and again, I think back to the original Marvel run, there was some sort of great, crazy, take the Tarkin, all these great big military things that you could do in those stories that Marvel had the scope back in the day to do. Obviously, Lucasfilm were keeping an eye on everything as they are everything now. But within the Clone Wars being a bigger, even bigger conflict than the Galactic Civil War, and you saying that you'd love the opportunity to do more stories, which fingers crossed you do, is the opportunity to delve into those sort of crazy corners of the conflict interesting as a writer to be able to tell battlefronts and stories that maybe haven't been seen before?
Oh yeah. I mean, that's my goal. Like I want to do, as much weird things as possible. Like I want to be able to, for a first series, like you've kind of got to out of the gates, there's the expectation to almost like play the hits in a way, like where
Sure.
it's like let's show Asajj and Embo and get some familiar faces in there because people enjoy that and people respond to that. But if we move forward, like I want to take those risks and I want to take those chances and get weird. I mean, how many times can we see in the Clone Wars or something like that? It's like, oh, we gotta stop the separatists because this such and such, hyperspace lane. Like how many hyperspace lanes are there and how many do we gotta fight over? Like can we give them a different conflict? Can we get some sort of weird element in there that is unexpected and different? It's like, when we had the Clone Wars series, what's his name? I would say Tarkovsky? Is
Oh,
that or no?
Tartakovsky, the Gendy stuff. Yeah, Gendy.
Gandhi, yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
Gandhi, yeah. That was remarkably strange, like
yeah,
and sometimes, and like I love that again, that like kind of recklessness, that ability and freedom to just do weird things, and I think that's where Marvel or not Marvel, where Star Wars starts to really thrive, and Dark Horse did that great. So if I did more, yeah, I mean that's the goal. Like I don't want to, again, it's like we said about placing it in a certain time. I don't want to be like, well, we're in this time, so Savage has to show up. Like
yeah.
I- like I'd rather just well, what other villain did they encounter? What other weird stuff? Like that's what I did a Bad Batch. I put them in one of the Dark Horse line. The hyperspace is like their main line. I did one issue of Bad Batch there, and I think it was really strange. Like it was like this Frankenstein making battle droid Frankenbots,
Yeah.
and I'm surprised they let it go. And I was like, okay, but I thought that was weird, and that's I like taking those type of risks. And I think it's just, especially the Bad Batch, if they're doing this stuff that nobody knows about and obviously didn't alter the course of the war, so like you're not
Yeah.
like with canon, why not? You know?
That's such a good point because uh, there's so much room for weird in Star Wars, and it's a conversation that comes up a lot. I think when people try and figure out what makes Star Wars work, like McCartney saying, "I can't write music, but I could, I wrote all those Beatles songs," or Spielberg saying, "I don't know how I make the films I make, and if I thought I did know how, I probably wouldn't be able to do it anymore." Star Wars is such a mix of kind of corny stuff, kind of weird stuff, kind of funny stuff, and exciting stuff. It's such a melange of different things. And you say about the weird, it's definitely room for more weird. And if the Bad Batch are being sent out on these clearly key missions that 9 out of 10 people, even in the Republic, don't even know about, you're right. I guess there's all the room in the world to tell the weirdest things if you want to do it.
Yeah, I mean I mean I totally agree, and I think that like you just sometimes you have to be weird. I mean, look, there's room for there's a reason why Andor works. Not just because it's so well written and well performed and well made,
Yeah.
but it's also like really tickles what George Lucas did initially in this fight against fascism and authoritarianism and all the stuff that he was doing in the original Star Wars. And it looks like Star Wars and it looks like THX, which dealt with authoritarianism as well.
Yeah.
And Andor works because of that. But at the same time, there's all these risks that were taken by so many people who've worked in Star Wars, and that works too. So I think we lose sight, I feel like it even happens within the Star Wars community that like Star Wars is like one particular thing, and it's many things. It's many things, it's many characters, it's many worlds, it's many different alien races and cultures, and there's just so much strange things that you can do. So the more you kind of free it from the box of like what the expectations say, like I think the better stuff you get. Like we said, I mean, I always go back to the Dark Horse run. I'm like, if you want to read some like weird and amazing Star Wars stuff, they did so many things that like now inconceivable now. Like the stuff they did is like there
Yeah.
never happen again, but like it did, and it was canon once upon a time,
That's so true. That's so true. And just the thought on that we've had Star Wars for nearly 50 years now, and there's kids coming into Star Wars now that'll have no idea what Splinter of the Mind's Eye is, or no idea what the Han Solo trilogy is, or any of that stuff that we might have read back in the day, because there's been so many, not iterations, but I guess maybe iterations. They had the Marvel chronology, and then you had Legends, and now we have canon, and it's all Star Wars, and we can pick from all these different areas. How would you sit with thinking that in 20 years' time, some kid's going to stumble across Ghost Agents and maybe know a bit about the Clone Wars, and maybe know, because it's on Disney Plus, about the Bad Batch, and opens your story? It's a whole new world for them. How, as a writer, does that feel to you?
It feels great. I mean, I wrote it with the idea of like, of kids reading it and being, possibly introduced to Star Wars or enhancing their love for Star Wars. My hope would be, 20 years from now, let's say, my hope would be that we've started, and not we, I won't be involved in this, but somebody has started the new Star Wars, lore, the new Star Wars legend, because it needs a new legend. It needs to go somewhere else. And I think everyone knows that.
Yeah.
So where it goes and how, I don't know, but like, I hope it goes somewhere new and different, but still retains what the things we love about Star Wars, and that becomes somebody's Star Wars. Like I talk to people who are a decade plus younger than me, and the prequels that's their Star Wars. Like
Yeah.
that is, to me, episodes 4, 5, 6 are my Star Wars. To them, that's their Star Wars. So we have this new Star Wars, but the process of like introduction and reintroduction, so they Star Wars becomes something to somebody else, this kid who maybe is not even born yet. So 20 years there's this new Star Wars, and then they realize, wow, well, there was like 9 episodes and they dealt with this, and there's all these kind of stuff around it, and one of those things is the Bad Batch. And if they find themselves drawn to that and love those stories, and they love the clones the way so many people do,
Yeah.
I think that would be pretty remarkable that they, the great thing about Star Wars is being able to share, my Star Wars is what I see as Star Wars. Doesn't make it any less or more, than somebody else's definition, but like we share, like, wow, like my kids, like start to them, like the sequel trilogy is like their thing.
Yeah.
I don't respond nearly as well to the sequel trilogy as they do, but like it's cool to see them see it, and then we share the experience where it's like, oh yeah, okay, you like Rise of Skywalker, okay, guess, but like like
Yeah.
then I can be like, like New Hope is so great, and they'll be like, it's kind of boring, and I'm like, yeah. Kind of. It actually is a little slow when I watch it with them. I'm like, yeah, no, I get it. I get it. It is a little slow. It's the pace and the editing and the cutting is different than like what, Force Awakens is.
Yeah.
But like to share that experience, I feel like is such a big part of Star Wars because it is multi-generational at this point and hopefully continues to be multi-generational and we continue to share it. And then I have a role in however, somebody shares it an adult, a parent with their kid or whatever the case may be. And I think that's pretty special.
It's very special. I've so enjoyed this. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. This is a lot of fun. And yeah, I'm always glad to talk about this stuff.
Thank you for joining us for this special edition of Canon Fodder. For more Star Wars podcast content, be sure to subscribe to Phantom Tracks Radio on your podcatcher of choice. Subscribe to all our social media at links.phantomtracks.com. Be sure to be checking out phantomtracks.com daily for all your latest Star Wars news. And you can also join us live on YouTube for Good Morning Tatooine every Sunday evening at youtube.com/PhanthaTracksTV.
Coming up next on Phantha Tracks Radio, it's Making Tracks.